So I am definitely a man of many passions and talents, but like the extent, like I'm not in the 1% of all those talents per se.
You have kind of what we would call scatterbrain almost, but then you go off and you do what 99% of people won't do, and that's you write a book. Do you find that there are certain things that you can just go all in on?
We kind of struck a deal. He's like, you owe me $1,000 if you don't have it by the end of the year, like done. And I was like, okay, here we go. And like that kicked me to gear.
What did Russia really teach you about yourself?
I'm very kind of a introverted person by nature. And so for a person who only wants to go to a party with someone they know, to go and spend 2 years speaking in a different language that you suck at with a person that you don't know, and just speak that foreign language to a bunch of strangers about topics most of them don't want to hear about, that definitely forces you to kind of like reassess things, change, and kind of break out of your shell.
Do you find that your brain is just truly a scatterbrain, and it just so happened that you found enough interest in the book to complete it, to finish it?
So I'll answer this in 2 ways.
So Carson, my man, I'm glad to have you on. Before we hop into the book, because everyone wants to know about the book, but before we do that, I want to get a sense of who you actually are. That's kind of our goal here on this podcast. So with that, what have you been spending the last, besides writing your book and maybe writing more books in the future, what are some things that you've spent a lot of time on that really define who you are as a person?
Yeah. I mean, as is the case with most people, work. And fortunately, my work is something I enjoy, and I'm in product design. So kind of our whole spiel is we are looking out for the end user. So we're trying to find problems with products, insights on how to improve things. So for me, it's like always problem solving and finding problems, which might, to the chagrin of people in my life, like I feel like I'm being negative, but I'm just like trying to improve things. So I definitely spend an outsized amount of time trying to improve things, and then try to like do that with my arguments as well. So I have a lot of discussions with friends, local, and online, and we just like we'll have debates. Like right now, I think I've been having a debate on who's better, Jordan or LeBron James, and then we've been talking about Attack on Titan versus like Lord of the Rings. And so really just like the thoughts people have, why they think something's good, like how the frameworks in which we're judging criteria. So that could be, why is a tent good in the outdoor space, because I've worked on like tents and sleeping bags. Why is it good to think Berserk is good but Cowboy Bebop isn't? That's my friend's tape, right? So I would say a lot of that stuff, and then more like closer to home, spending times with friends and family. Pretty involved in like my local church, so that's a big thing, helping and serving. We have service projects and things like that. And I mentioned outside of this when we were catching up, but I just moved a little closer to home. So kind of what the next stages in my life are going to look like where do I want to work, what I want to do, with the advent of AI integrating into my sphere, as I'm sure you've thought about it and people talk about it everywhere. What's that going to look like for me and like my future design career? So.
So you talked about you're all about problem solving, and I know from a bit of research I've done into you, you're big into industrial design and all of that. Can you break down more of that for the guests? Because I think that's going to play a huge role in how you eventually went on to become an author. I think that's going to be quite interesting for them to know.
I think I was an author before I was an industrial designer, but I think the roots of that, I can kind of get into that. I grew up in a household. My dad's an illustrator. I've got like some paintings over here of his. So for video games specifically, so I was very enmeshed in that world of video games, concept art. I've been drawing ever since I was a little kid, so I love that, but it's not really a stable job career. And my dad was kind of like nudging me, like, don't be an artist. And so I kind of went into graphic design very briefly, and then heard about industrial design, which the way I heard about it doesn't seem to be a huge aspect of the space, but there are a lot of people at the time that my dad knew, there's like a college like Fangzhou. He worked on like Avatar and a lot of like, these video games where like they're the ones designing the machines and the vehicles and the guns and like they were industrial designers. And so he said, hey, maybe you should look into that. There was a program locally that I went to at Brigham Young University, and it was a very arduous kind of process to get into that class. You had to do like little quizzes and tests and little like projects to like get in, and it took about 6 months of like staying up till 4 a.m. to like get into that class. But I just really enjoy it because I get to be creative and solve problems, and that's something I feel like translates into my writing as well. Where like the characters have a big problem, how do we creatively solve it in a way that like doesn't create plot holes? Because I'm a big like I hate plot holes kind of person. So does that answer the question? I guess I didn't talk too much about industrial design, but
No, that definitely brings insight into who you are. And by the way, plot holes, anybody will tell you they don't like plot holes. But I think what's quite interesting here is based on all of that, it seems like you were just a very naturally creative person. Is that truly the case, or was creativity something that just got embedded into you because of the people around you, or did you just find yourself naturally being creative?
it definitely wasn't foisted on me. The rest of my siblings didn't delve into writing, books, art, any of that kind of stuff.
Mm.
Um, I'm sure like maybe I was one or two and I can't remember. Like my dad's like, "Oh, hey, you want to play on my easel or something?" But it wasn't like piano lessons where I was told you're going to do piano until this age or whatever, which I did do, and I
Mm.
was probably the only one in the family that also did that. So I think I do have just a creative knack, and I enjoy that aspect. So yeah,
Okay. And speaking of creativity, you were talking about how you tend to do debates on different topics in regards to things like anime, video games, etc. And then you also talked about how you before we even started this podcast, you were talking about how you're looking to get closer to home with your job because you're taking products and almost pulling them apart to figure out how can we make them better and all of that, so you get to use your creativity there. But in particular, one area that I actually want to touch on a little bit here was I heard something about the fact that now you have to let me know if I'm wrong, but you were also creating games on floppy disks as a child. Is that true? And if so, what was that process like? Because to me, that is so cool. I don't think I can even remember a floppy disk.
I've made games. I've made both digital and physical games, and I've used floppy
Okay.
disks. So you're not far off base, and I might have. I don't know if there's somewhere like on a DeviantArt post or something. So I wonder what kind of where you got that, but
Mm.
it wouldn't surprise me. It might have been a CD-ROM, but I know at one point I had a friend like give me like I don't even know if it was the official thing, but it was like you could build your own little like video games. I don't remember what those are called, but yeah, you could just like decide all the NPCs dialogue and like what kind of upgrades you could get, and so I made a game like that. I was in
Mm.
video
Okay.
games, like I
Yeah.
did a voice for one, but uh, yeah,
Mm.
I
Guess
don't.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna
you
have
have to tell me
to.
more where you heard this.
Yeah, but still, you were making video games in some way, shape, or form. What got you into that space? Because that's not a space that you hear very many people having, I guess you could say, access to.
It was like a like an emulator type, not an emulator, but a game where it was like it had all the structure for you. So almost like you build a roller coaster tycoon game, right? You'd like build your whole place. It was like that, but you could decide what the map looked like and then how you moved on. So it was a little bit more in depth, right? Like what triggers something in the game, the dialogue, as opposed to just building pre kind of built rides or adding the loop. How many loops do you want on the ride? We worked on things like I said, both my parents were in the video game industry, and so like I'd get there and the animators would show me stuff, but I don't have anything to show for it in terms of like here's a really cool game you can go on YouTube and see like people trying to play it or anything like that. I didn't ever get
Mm,
too far.
okay. Well, still, it seems like you had a lot of creative paths that you went down. I mean, you talked about how you're an industrial designer. You talked about how you're an illustrator. Your dad was an illustrator. Then you talk about how the fact that you're a novelist. So many people struggle to even have one creative outlet nowadays. How was it just a curiosity thing that got you into all these different paths, or was there something that triggered within you that made you just want to follow every single creative path that you've been down so far?
I think there's a root of like I have a very strong imagination, and then when I have opportunities to maybe explore it in a certain way, I take advantage of them. And then there's probably, to be honest, an element of me where like it gets a little hard at some point. Like you pick up the guitar and you have fun, you learn enough chords to like play a bunch of songs, but then like to really get to that next level, you have to invest a lot of time, and I probably like pivot to try something else. So I
Mm-hmm.
am definitely a man of many passions and talents, but like the extent, like I'm not in the 1% of all those talents per se. Yeah,
Okay. I actually I want to bite back on that because
yeah,
you said that you have kind of what we would call scatterbrain almost, where you get started on a project and then you get so far with it before cutting off and going to a new project. You could also say it's ADHD kind of thing. But then you go off and you do what 99% of people won't do, and that's you write a book. Now, I don't know you'll have to let us know how long it took you to write your book, but that's also something that many people will start and never finish, yet you
sure.
did. So, do you find that there are certain things that you can just go all in on and almost find mastery, but then there were other things that just felt like little side projects? Or do you find that your brain is just truly a scatterbrain and it just so happened that you found enough interest in the book to complete it, to finish it?
So I'll answer this in two ways. One, I think it's heavily reliant on people in my life to kind of like help push me over the edge on some of this stuff. So I'm very collaborative. So if I'm working on a book, you need feedback. Like anyone who hasn't got feedback on their book, you're gonna know real quick. And that doesn't mean my book is 100% like perfect or amazing or whatever, right? But I think it is a consequence of how much feedback you've gotten, how many people were beta readers, how much you took on their feedback. And so I had those types of people in my life. Not as many as I would have liked. Um, but like for instance, I finished the book because in part, this isn't the whole reason, I would tell people about it. Hey, you gonna read this? I have this draft. Hey, Dad, you want to read that? And like when it's published, I will read it. Like I would have people saying, until it's done, I won't really like support you. I know that maybe sounds bad, but
Yeah.
um, and so we kind of struck a deal. It was like if you, I was like, if, he's like, you owe me $1,000 if you don't have it by the end of the year, like done. And I was like, okay, here we
Mm.
go. And like that kicked me into gear where like I went through all the formatting and I got it through Amazon. I got a first edition, and then I beat the crap out of that thing, and that just covered, you
Mm.
know. And so those types of things have been really helpful. I'll give another example. I've I made a Kickstarter like card game. If you're familiar with Exploding Kittens, I know that was a very popular one. I didn't do
Yes,
that one.
actually.
Hopefully, yeah. But it's called Fetus Feud, and originally I had an idea while I was living in Russia. Um, I was on like a volunteer church mission, and I just
Mm.
doodle in my sketchbook or like my little planner, and I had like some weird idea for like a little side scroll video game. Like it's just like a weird game, just and I talked about it. Then I got my first internship out of college. What was in college, and we talked about, hey, what kind of things could we work on when we have downtime, since it was a consultancy and we didn't always necessarily have lots of work. And I brought up this idea of this game, and they said, oh, what if we made it a card game? I started working on it. I ended up leaving that business, and then I was just working on it in my free time. A fellow designer came over and said, oh, this is really cool. and he decided to go in on it, and he was like the business side, I was the design side, so I kind of came up with the game and the art, packaging and all of that. And so we like did that together. And so it's like I always have someone there kind of help me, whether it's a sounding board to bounce ideas off of, they want the next chapter to read. Without that, I probably tend to meander and go, ah, it's not worth it if other people don't want to
Mm.
see me or like engage with the content I'm making. If I make art and no one wants to look at it, then at the end of the day, we're social creatures. So I know people want to say just do it for yourself, but uh, I want to do it for myself, and that's what the story I've told is, and that's how I will tell stories. But I do want to engage with the audience. I want them to like give me feedback. What are their theories? What did they think? So
Mhm. So your family helped, or your dad specifically helped you quite a bit. I actually want to touch back on the fact that you talked about how you were in Russia and you you traveled to Russia. Were you staying in Russia at the time?
yeah, I lived there for 2 years,
Okay.
2012 to 2014.
And was it the internship that was driving you to Russia, or I know you
This was
talked about how you were there.
pre-college.
I was going to say you were also there for a church thing. So tell us a little bit more about that because I think that'll interest the audience for knowing a little bit more about you.
Yeah. So I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and as part of that, young men, I think the ages have changed. It's been a while. I think it's been like what, 12 or 14 years since I was on it, but we go out for 2 years and share a message about our faith with people. And so on my own dime, I saved up money as a young kid, and you don't know where you're going. And I ended up going to Russia. I went to like Moscow and some of the other cities around it.
Hmm.
Um, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to go back because I think there was a lot of political turmoil, obviously wars and things like that. And so I'd love to go back and kind of meet some people that I met while I was there. Just do the things I couldn't while I was there. But um, yeah, did I get it? Did I hit on
Yeah.
everything you were asking about that?
Yeah. What did Russia really teach you about yourself? Because that's something where I feel like no matter where you go, and I've talked with a lot of authors who have felt this way, anytime they went somewhere, whether it was to live or visit, there was always something that they took out of it that almost taught them a lesson about themselves that they never would have found out otherwise. Did Moscow teach you anything along those lines?
Yeah, no, definitely. How do I reduce it to something so simple? 2 years of like all day, every day, meeting the people, walking the streets. It wasn't a vacation by any means. I think the first thing was I'm very kind of a introverted person by nature. I don't
Mm,
necessarily get energy from interacting with strangers. I mean, this is fine. I'm sure if I did this for 3 hours, I'd be like, "Ugh," like drained at the end of the day. I'm like, I'd want to go just kind of chill by myself.
yeah.
And so, for a person who only wants to go to a party with someone they know, if they know people there, right? To go and
Hmm.
spend 2 years speaking in a different language that you suck at, and it's very hard, with a person because you have like companions that you'd go around with, like a partner that you don't know and you don't necessarily get along with, and just speak that foreign language to a bunch of strangers about topics most of them don't want to hear about. That definitely forces you to kind of like reassess things, change, and kind of break out of your shell, and subsequently help other people do the same. So that's the biggest one for sure. But then also just seeing, I'm known as the devil's advocate with some of my friends. I'm always a contrarian, not just to annoy them, but you see a lot of people struggling with things that maybe we'd be really quick to judge, right? You'd just be like, oh, this person's doing this person didn't show up for a meeting, or this person did show up for a meeting that we had with them, and you saw what they would sacrifice to do that. And you realize there's so much going on in people's lives that you don't know about. And for me at that age, it was very like, oh, I think I know what's going on. I'm projecting my worldview and kind of my thoughts and how people should act onto everyone. And then you really get kind of a reality check when you see people struggling in poverty and what they're giving up. And so that really, I think that really shaped me as well.
Mm. That's actually quite interesting because it goes back to I had a conversation with another author one day where he basically we were talking about this idea of perspective, and he brought up how most people do one or the other. They're either too zoomed in on a situation to where they only see one point of view, or they're too zoomed out to the point where they aren't able, where they're seeing everything, but it also means that they're not formulating their own thoughts, their own opinions, and so on and so forth. And so then we went on to discuss, he was talking this about this idea of balance. And do you think that being in Moscow and seeing all of those things really helped you to find that balance of understanding how to look at a situation for yourself and find your own point of view, but also just having more perspective on something to be able to see it from a bird's eye view?
I mean, I still struggle with that. It's still a balance every day. It might be on
Mm-hmm.
different topics with different people, and I might be a little less quick to judge, and then have that immediate follow up, kind of like you might have a assumption you make, and then immediately follow it up with kind of like, let me check myself. Well, maybe they're not that way, and so that's kind of the devil's advocate, which is more of like an
Mm,
angel's advocate coming in, being like, well, maybe you shouldn't do that so quickly. And I think that's just kind of it's become more second nature, but it hasn't vanished. And I think that's always the tension is doing that, and especially making sure that when situations are wrought with emotion, that you definitely are doing that and you give yourself some time away if needs be. But
well, it looks like you have quite the experience there, and it seems like you all those experiences, I'm assuming, you brought into your book. So I actually want to move a little bit towards your book here. You're the author of a book called The Shadow Spark. For listeners who know literally nothing about it, that includes myself for the most part. I've done a little bit of research, so I understand a little bit of it. But how would you describe it if someone were to just pick it off a bookshelf in their local bookstore?
this is the hardest part about being an author, and I'm sure you've run into it. Um, because, like you just mentioned, that forest for the trees, that bird's eye view, you've been in the
Yeah.
forest, you're like in a 10-foot hole.
Yeah.
Um, Especially when I have some big twists in there. I'm like, how do I talk about it without ruining it? But
Oh,
um,
yeah.
I think, especially since I've been recently reacting to and kind of listening to some feedback from a fellow TikToker who's been reading it. Not trying to bury the lead here. I know I'm probably not the best for 10-second shorts on YouTube, but I feel like it's the best you can think of every single like gritty, dark, very violent video game cutscenes like that, stitched like 1,000 cutscenes with actual heart. So it's not just pure violence and gore or anything like that. Um, to like zoom in and just like give a synopsis, it's about family overcoming like obstacles and using that family in a world that's like going to hell. So it's very like a twist on Dante's Inferno if you think Doom mixed with like the Matrix, and
Mm,
with strong team values, found family, and a main character who's kind of unraveling kind of what the bad guys are up to before the end of the world happens and all of
mhm,
mankind is kind of damned. So, supernatural dystopian sci-fi with kind of fantasy elements.
mm.
How I would try to simplify it.
Yeah. Yeah, otherwise I get it. You start giving away too much, especially if you have twists. It's always the worst. I know what you mean though. I know what you mean. There are plenty of authors who've been on here that are always like, I love talking about my books, but I also hate it because I feel like I'm gonna give away way too much information. And so I fully understand that. But you were just talking about this idea of based off Doom, The Matrix. By the way, great game and games series if you guys haven't seen it. But I was talking with another author, this was about a month ago, and one of the things that she mentioned that stuck with me and that I've tried to almost take with me whenever I read someone's book is she talks about this idea of every single book that you will ever read in some way, shape, or form mimics the author's life. Now, that doesn't mean it needs to be exact, right? Because in your case, if we're talking Doom and Matrix, of course, we don't I guess it depends on who you ask, but we don't
Do you
live
know
in
that?
a yeah, we don't live in a absolute literal hell. Again, it depends on who you ask. But do you think that there's moments in your book that actually do almost come from your life, besides just this idea of inspiration from video games and media?
Short answer is yes, but I'm gonna think of what things specifically. Yeah, so obviously the plot is not my life. Like demonic robots haven't taken over the world to bring about Armageddon, right? Um, and I can't phase through walls. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
Um, I know that would. I probably wouldn't be on this podcast. No offense. I'd probably be Bogo Bucks and wouldn't be writing books. But
Yeah.
I think for me, this is an evolving thing as I look forward into like the next books I want to write. But for this specific one, I think the most like if you were to extract where's Carson in there, I'm very introspective. I think the way the characters view the world, I kind of almost
Mm.
view the characters in the book the way that J.K. Rowling talks about like Horcruxes for Voldemort. Like I split my soul into these different characters and
Mm.
kind of use them now to like refract different light and elements. Whereas it maybe gets convoluted, and I feel like I can't tell a character that doesn't just seem like a wacky dude because it would be me. And I feel like this was a great opportunity for me. Like, here's kind of more the stoic side of me. Here's kind of the more pessimistic, kind of lone wolf aspect of me in this character. And then here's kind of the goofy, fun, making jokes. And not just to split it up because I'm narcissistic and I need a bunch of characters to like represent me in a book. Um, but rather like that's what I know. You write what you know, so you the kind of
Mhm.
humor that you like, you're gonna write that, or the people in your lives. And to me, especially kind of the humor element, I feel like there's two characters, the twins. They are very humorous. They kind of similar to maybe the twins in uh, Harry Potter, but they're definitely more prevalent and main characters. One of them, he kind of talks in the book about how like people just think he's a goofball and all of this, but it's kind of showing how some of these character traits are coping mechanisms for like how they struggle through things. They're living in this kind of hell on earth. Like their parents are split up. One of them's dying. One of them's like leading a different rebellion. They've gone through their own kind of uh, hell hell of their own, and kind of see that they still have that life and that happiness and the jokes. Just kind of like they're finding the silver linings to use that to almost make
Mm.
chainmail to protect themselves. So they're finding all the little, and I feel like that's something I've done. I know we talked about Russia, but when you're outside, especially during those long winter months, you're outside 12 hours a day. I've lived in Michigan for the last 7 years, similar
Mm.
winters, but I was inside most of the time. I was not walking the streets of Russia with 3 inches of ice everywhere, and that in combination with just talking to people, getting chased out by drunks, and just feeling like an idiot a lot of the time because you don't know what you're like. The language is so tough. You find those like silver linings. You find ways to turn things. And I would say before my mission, writing, I was definitely like more pessimistic, and I'd find reasons to be like, "Oh, this is bad." And so almost
Mm.
showing characters that can embody that kind of change, even though the world's gotten way worse in the book, these characters are finding ways to survive, to unite, to use their family, to kind of create new family, and to stay strong to like their morals and their values, even when the world's kind of shifting away from them.
Mm. Mm. That's that was actually a really good way to put it. The whole Horcrux illustration. That was such a good way to put it. Does that mean that when you were initially creating this book, you were almost thinking of the characters first and the plot sort of built around them? Or did you already kind of have a plot in place and then you kind of got this idea of, hey, I have all these personalities and I can really showcase them within my characters, and then that came later.
It's hard to like pretend that my like process for this, since it has occurred over like a decade. Like there have been years where I didn't do anything. It drastically changed throughout like 150 pages. I would say definitely the second. I think I had a story, kind of a concepts, a what if, that I wanted to tell, and then as I started to flesh out those characters, I did so with certain aspects of myself, and I kind of imbued and filled them with those elements of me. Um, so yeah, and one other thing I just forgot to mention that I think also in the book, I tend to encounter spaces that give me ideas for like, oh, this would be a really cool scene for a battle or for like a secret base or whatever. Um, and as a person who's been heavily involved in like scouting in the outdoors, obviously I mentioned that I work in that space. So backpacking in Michigan, you kind of see a lot of these spaces, and I feel like it's not me, but it's like my experience that I also put into this. So there's a lot of different milieus, settings, and environments in the books that I try to bring out. Um, so just wanted to throw that in there as well.
Mhm. Use what you know. Use what you know. It's funny because one of the same guests I was just talking about earlier, the one who was talking about perspective, it always blows my mind how much of the author's life does get incorporated, because he talked about how when he was making his book, he was out there studying different martial arts and different weapons, and he was getting his hands on these things so that he could truly understand them. And then I had another guest on who said that she wanted to understand what it was like to have the extremely long hair as a female, someone who had hair that was almost like Rapunzel, you could say. So she grew her hair out to unbelievable lengths for that reason. It's always so cool to see. Do you think that people should almost be looking at their life more, not even when it comes to book perspective, but when it comes to almost anything, whether that's career, hobby, passion, friendships, relationships, anything, do you believe that it's even more important to almost be looking at your current experience when deciding those things rather than always trying to pursue the new next thing?
Yeah, I think the novelty of however you're garbing or like, putting the clothes on your story, whether that's it's the newest techie sci-fi experience, the craziest like new languages or whatever. That's always going to come second, third, fourth to just the human heart and nature, and that's all around us, right? You're gonna see a mom at Costco with her kid, and you should be like, look at this, like look at how that kid is looking at their mom. Now you can transpose that into a cyberpunk world where they're in some, hospital. Very different, but like there's a heart and there's some connection people can see, and I think I wish I did it more. I think everyone needs to do more of it. Is just annotating those moments. When you see something, maybe your dad disappointed you, maybe your brother annoyed you, like in some aspect, you don't have to write down the specifics, like he took too many chocolate chip cookies and I wanted more. Like, that's probably not going to translate. But if it's like
Yeah.
someone's always looking out for themselves and there's like this rivalry between brothers because one is like always looking out for himself, but in a world, where resources are scarce, that's really going to come to a head because you can't just like be really selfish because that means you're dooming your sibling, right? Whereas in today, it's like,
Mm.
okay, you get the nasty cookies, I got the good ones, but there's only one cookie, and so if that kid does that, you're, you know, saying, my brother's gonna die, right? And so like you can
Mm.
find that anywhere in your life, and so if you can be aware of that and write those moments down and go, ooh, I like this. I heard a story from my father mentioning something about his brother who did this, and it's like that really hit me. Write it down. You don't have to literally carbon copy that into your book, but that can
Mm.
inspire stuff. And I think that's where the strongest elements come through. It's not
Mm.
what the dragon powers are. Like, that's cool. That might get people, but that's not going to keep them to stay in your novel. So,
Nice. Yeah, for sure. Now, your book, just from what you said earlier about kind of what it's about, you uh, I'm getting this idea of almost cyberpunk and supernatural elements. Now, the way I look at that, I almost feel like I don't want to even say two genres, but it feels like two separate entities being blended together. Now, obviously, it's always cool when you're able to do that, but it almost feels like that's something that shouldn't play well together. Because when I think of cyberpunk styles, I think of very techy and all that. And then you have supernaturals, which is where you start to get into more epic fantasy world, right? You get the crazy powers and all of that. And so you combine these two together. How did you manage to accomplish that? Because again, it's cool to see two things that feel like complete opposites mix well together, but you would think that in a book it would be not only difficult but almost kind of, people would almost feel as though that's not great, if I'm just going to be blunt about it.
No,
So
no.
how did you manage to even pull that off, to blend two things together? And people have enjoyed it. I've seen a couple reviews and people enjoy it.
I mean, you're 100% correct that like it seems like something you shouldn't do, and that it is going to be difficult to do. How well I did it, that's for other people to decide. But I think you look at if I it's I wouldn't say it's cyberpunk. I kind of use these terms like dystopians. It's like what are we going to be in the future? 300 years from now, what does technology look like? That's going to be more
Mm-hmm.
cyberpunk than it is today, right? Um, but there are tropes and kind of expectations people bring into these genres that you might not be
Mm-hmm.
delivering on, and so they might feel like what gives. Um, I think it depends on what your angle is. For me, it was like, hey, if you're familiar with Dune, or not Dune,
Mm-hmm.
Doom,
Yep.
like, okay, stuff needs to power things, right? Like,
Mm.
and so what does that look like? You can bring in supernatural elements there. Now, I will admit that I think that maybe some of the twists or some of the ways that it starts to manifest itself comes later on, uh, and I'm just like biting the bullet on saying, yeah, maybe it's gonna shock some people or surprise some people, and they're like, oh, this is not what I was buying in for when I first got into this, and that's why I try to like front load. There's supernatural elements and there's some stuff in here so that you understand that. But I mean, all your comments are spot on. I remember listening to a Brandon Sanderson podcast. I think it was Writing Excuses. I used to listen to that on the bus to school all the time, and it was like, don't have a big twist where it changes genres in the middle of the book. Like that's gonna people are picked it up because it was sci-fi, and then they find out it's fantasy. I wouldn't say my book does that. It doesn't like teleport you to Dragonland or anything like that, but it does
Mm-hmm.
recontextualize some of the things and how subtle I was about it. I've had some people be like, "Oh, this is obviously X Y Z," and so like they caught on immediately. I've had other people be like, "Oh, I didn't see that twist coming," and so that can be hard to navigate as you're trying to do something like that because you're like, "Well, how much do I like foreshadow this?" Because I do want people to feel like they know what they're getting themselves into, and I try to do that when I design the cover. To be like, okay, there's something going on, and how you write the blurbs, and it's a gamble, I guess, at the end of the day, right? Like you're
Mm-hmm.
picking two genres and blending them. Uh,
Mm.
but I'm not. I could say so much, but I'll leave it there.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it worked. It worked. That's the thing. So, do you then believe that? Are you a believer of someone of kind of going against the grain then? Because again, that's something that I assume everyone wants to go against the grain, but deep down they don't. Because when you go against the grain, when you go to the comfortable, you live comfortably, right? But as soon as you go against the grain, you do something different, if it hits and it hits hard. But if it flops, then you feel like you've accomplished zero in the process and you don't learn anything. So, based on your thoughts there, then are you someone who deeply believes in this idea of just going against the grain? That is what I'm always going to do. I'm always going to be a gambler, you could say.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I think that at the end of the day, write what you want to write, tell the story you want to tell, but be aware that you have to market it to other people. And so, if you have to make some concessions, I think that's fine, and I'm probably going to do more of that in my next trilogy. It's a totally different topic, but I'm like I'm going to be aware of that going in. But as a young kid starting writing a thing, you had an idea, it was cool, you wanted to do that and this and that, and then you started blending it together, and then you're trying to smooth it all out. You're kind of like, I can't redo the whole thing, or I don't want to. And from
Mm,
that angle, I just like say, screw it, this is what I'm going to do. So it's less of me trying to go against the grain. I'm not like, oh, hey, I could have guns that shoot bullets, but why don't they shoot hot dogs? Because that's against the grain. Like I'm not just doing that. Um, Now I think I probably do that on like my TikToks, and like I'll just do something wacky and something out
yep.
there. But
Yeah.
uh, not so much like trying to go against the grain, other than saying if I want to make something feel original and different in some aspects, but some people think that's really cool. Some people think, oh, this is campy and this is a cliche or this sounds like something I've read before. I've had feedback like that, and I'm like, I've never played that video game, seen that show, read that book, so I wasn't ripping it off, but it all depends on the content diet people have reading it and how they're going to interpret it. So they bring a lens to it that you can't really impact outside of what you write.
Mm, mm. It makes sense. Speaking of, I actually want to move towards this idea of, I remember you said before that you're more of an introverted person. And then you talked about how for the longest time it was difficult for you to stick to a task. And in fact, your dad had to literally tell you, if you don't finish this book, you're paying me money, basically. And that finally got you to really lock in and do it. But I know for a lot of authors, especially ones who are introverted, or maybe they have self-doubts, or they are very scatterbrained, they feel almost like their book wouldn't have been good enough, and as a result, they were this close to not releasing it. Did that ever happen to you? Were you ever on that fence where you felt like, I just I don't think my book is going to be that good, and I don't think I'm going to release it, but then you eventually did anyway?
I always knew I was going to do it. It was just a matter of when, and how
Mm,
much work am I going to put into it, and when do I move on. In in art, like the more you draw, the better you get. And sometimes we get caught up just trying to perfect the one painting or the one drawing, and like, oh, I'll erase this and I'll fix that, and that painting is never going to look that good. It usually looks just like a bunch of scribbles and eraser marks. And I think for me, it was more like, how much eraser marks do I want on this, and like how much am I going to invest into it? Do I think it's good enough? Because self-published, we talk it up, we talk it down. At the end of the day, like I push a button on a computer. Now, how much money do I want to invest into it? Like that was more for me, like how much time and energy am I going to like invest into tons of different edits, and do I want to implement all those edits? And that was the question more than am I going to hit publish, or do I
mm.
think people will read it? So
Confidence. I like it. I like it. So you're still working as a full-time industrial designer. Am I correct in saying that?
hopefully, I'm
Hopefully.
that's
Okay.
yeah. I'm like I said, I'm between jobs, so I moved out here looking to find something else. But that's still
Okay.
my career path. Is that it's recently just ended. So
Okay. So when you were writing your book, I'm going to go off the cuff here and assume that you were also working in your industrial designer job.
hmm
So, what did those days look like for you then? You knew that you wanted to publish this book. You knew that you were in the process of writing, editing, and just ensuring that you could put out a good product. But then you also have everything else stacked on top of that, from family your to your job. And so what did that look like for you? Was it like, oh my god, I'm up at 5 a.m. writing before I have to go to work? Or what were those days like when you were in the process of writing and putting together this book?
it varied depending on what aspect of the book I was writing,
Mm,
whether it was editing. Well, to give like a really rough view of when I was doing that, I get feedback, and then like I said, maybe just starting from when I printed it off, going through it, it was, hey, I got to get through X amount of chapters a day, and I'm gonna edit them, and I kind of would like time myself. I think it takes about this long to edit it and beat it up, and then I didn't like moving on until I knew how I would solve some of the problems. Didn't necessarily write out the corrections, and I think that for me was where I get hung up the most. I'd be like, oh crap, like I've painted myself into a corner. I don't want to continue to make updates and changes because whatever solution is going to have cascading effects. So I'd very like pause, and that could be a matter of a day, thinking about it, talking with someone, just bouncing ideas off of them. It could be a week, it could be 2 weeks, and like there were some tough points where maybe I could like break off and say, hey, I know it's only going to really impact this, and then I'm going to like earmark the chapters I think it will affect. Um, it was late nights, probably mostly near the end when I was like, we had a cruise I was going on. I was like, I brought my laptop on the cruise. I'm sitting there like trying to make some final edits to like, okay, it's Christmas Eve, and I'm like, everybody, I got you a copy of my book. Like it's coming in the mail like in a week. And yeah, so definitely a lot of that. I think it just takes up a lot of mental bandwidth. So it's just like going on a walk and thinking through it, or it's just churning up the time in your mind. And fortunately, because I'm a single dude, I didn't have like a whole lot of other things pressing on me. And at the end of the day, I think this book should have been written a lot sooner. So I'm a procrastinator at the end of the day with some of that stuff. And so it's helpful to have people put deadlines on me. It's also just the fact that my job is very like, here's a brief that is given to you by like brand and marketing, and here's like your manager saying you have to do this, and you have timelines. You can't make the thing perfect. You can't make it the way you want. But a book, no one's asking you like, when's it done? Like, okay, I had a lot of people being like, I don't want to hear you talk about it until it's done. And unless I brought it up, people probably weren't asking about it. Doesn't matter. I could publish it in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So that's the real struggle, is like, how much do you want to put into this? How perfect do you want it to be before you say, I'm moving on to the next thing?
Mm.
So.
And I mean, you were self-published anyway, right? So you didn't have the pressure of a traditional publisher breathing down your neck. Trust me, I've heard from authors how ridiculous that can be. But you were talking about moving on to the next thing. I know you just mentioned earlier you're working on a new trilogy. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think my first book should have been a trilogy, and I probably didn't have the skills to do it. But this time I'm like, okay, I'm going to plot the whole thing out. The basic premise is you arrive in a world that's post a war between humanity and Atlantis. Atlantis rose up. We worked together. There was a huge war. We brought down the moon to like bury them back into the ocean. And it's kind of a fallout world where you've got irradiation oceans, and the main characters are kind of Quasimodos, where they're orphan Atlanteans kind of working in the coastline, helping desalination plants, and kind of just like outcasts on this island of Cuba. And then they kind of find out their true nature, and it's going to be all about like belonging. How do you find a home when you're kind of seen as like an outsider, and kind of dealing with creating a home throughout this trilogy. And so I'm really excited. I love the ocean, and so it's going to be just like ocean galore based, like mutant creatures and the characters. But it's not going to have, I'm not doing too much of that genre mashup. I'm keeping it more simple so that I can just focus on those characters and have it be more character driven. But I do really like the setting. It's not going to be as plot heavy as this in that sense, where it's twists and turns and tons of different storylines competing. I mean, it will get complex throughout the trilogy for sure, but yeah.
Caught my interest, and I think you've definitely caught the interest of quite a few people in regards to Shadow Spark as well. I'm actually really looking forward to potentially reading that. But so you talked about you have a lot of creative interests between video games, other forms of media, writing your book, then obviously being an industrial designer, problem solving, all these different things that helped you to sort of build who you are today. Do you find that you're someone who also really enjoys reading? Because you already have quite a few creative paths that you've gone down, or you're already someone who is spending a lot of time in regards to just being creative. Do you find that you sit down and read books to truly understand that better, or do you just go for more of, hey, I'm the creative here and I'm just going to run with whatever ideas that I can come up with?
Yeah, it's a good question, because as a creative, when you are creative for your job and you get home, how creative you want to be in different spheres. Like I love drawing. I don't do as much drawing as I used to because I draw a lot at work. Um, Reading, I've noticed, it's very similar to playing piano and guitar, which is another creative passion I enjoy, which doesn't get enough attention as well. Is I will start playing a song, come up with a piece of music, and then I'm like, hold on, like this is a song, like this is just my subconscious like cultivating something, and like this sounds familiar, and I'm like,
Yeah.
dang it, I thought I came up with that. And so I've noticed when I read, I can start to kind of like, I don't know if you ever talk to people with an accent. I start maybe doing the accent a little bit, not like
Mm,
intentionally or like it's just subconscious.
yeah.
And I feel like I do that with music and a bit of like reading. So like I read Red Rising, and I was like, oh, maybe I'm gonna. Do I need like the tenses in that is very different than most books? And I'm like, I remember when I read that, and I that series when I was reading it, it started impacting my writing, like how I
Mm,
was doing that. And I was like, crap. And it wasn't me trying to be like, I'm gonna make this like Red Rising. It was just like, here's a really well crafted thing that's had all the editing, and oh, and so I've noticed a bit of that. I think I've risen above it, and I've started diving back into books a little bit more. But it's a challenge. Like, where do you divide your interests? I think the
hmm.
craft is where I'm more interested now than the stories, because
Yeah.
when I listen to those stories or I read them, I can already I start thinking through it as an author as instead of like as a reader. I'm like, oh, I see what they're doing there. I see what he's setting it up. I see how he's using like a sound and then a paragraph of text, and then boom, he takes a step, and
Mm,
I like it kind of, once you know how the sausage is made, it kind of loses a little bit of the savor.
mm,
So I think that's kind of maybe a little bit why I've been reading less, but um, I think it's something I'm always going to be doing and diving into. But because, like you mentioned, I tend to be going against the grain, and I am a contrarian. As you know, on Book Talk, it just feels like there's the same 15 books that are
mm.
talked about. Pick your number, 15,
Yeah.
20, 10.
Yep.
Um, and I'm like, I just don't want to. I'm not this person who won't listen to the new trending song or whatever, but I just like, it just feels like that space has changed so much. I used to go to the library and just find a book, and this is cool. And so I need to kind of find my bearings a bit more when it comes to like, what do I want to read? Do I
Mm,
just want to like,
yeah.
because I don't want to just write something that is similar to something else so that I can find success. I want to be true to myself, but I want to improve my craft, and I want to enjoy the stories I'm listening to that could like help me. But with all of that, like I said, influencing me, I got to get my ducks in a row, and that's why I'm kind of plotting out my whole book and my whole new
Mm.
trilogy in a way I didn't before, so that maybe then I can start to read all that stuff and then not feel like I'm letting it influencing where everything's going. So,
Mm. It, yeah, it definitely feels like a problem, but I feel like in most people's eyes, that would almost be a good problem to have. And what I mean by that is the majority of people, and I'll be, for example, I can use myself here as an example. So I have been watching podcasts for a good 2 to 3 years before I started this one myself. And I remember after I started watching podcasts, I fell in love with it. There are plenty of podcasts out there that I watch now, and I fell in love with them. And I could every week listen to two, three, four, seven podcasts and have absolutely no problem with it. I loved it. But deep down, there was still that part of me that was almost terrified to start my own. And it wasn't because I didn't think I have the skills. I love conversations. We've been having a great conversation so far. I love conversations. I love being able to pick someone's brain on all these little things that I pick up on. But I still almost had that imposter syndrome of being like, I don't know if I can make a good podcast that people will want to watch. And eventually I got to the point where I was like, screw it. I'm just going to get over that and go for it. But that's just it. I happened to finally get a spine and say, just go for it. Many people don't. So, looking at your experience, then, you're the kind of person where you're kind of the opposite of that, where instead of constantly bringing in more information. In this case, it would be listening or reading stories and then taking that and applying some of the strategies and tactics to your own books. Instead, you are the kind of person where you almost don't want to bring in more information because you feel like not only could it influence you, but it's just going to make you sound like everybody else. But let's be real, 90% of people out there are not like that. So what would your advice then be to someone who wants to get to that point where they can start being a little more creative for themselves and pursuing something for themselves, not so much of a I'm going to absorb and absorb and absorb more and more information and then try to figure out my path from there? Because personally, I don't know about you, but I feel like your problem is a good one to have.
Yeah, I mean, I think I wouldn't say that I'm correct necessarily. I do think I need to read more, and I know how it will come across to anyone who's like, hold on, he doesn't think he needs to read. No, I think I need to read more. Believe me, I tell people plenty. There's a lot of things I need to do more of. But I think you need to first find your inspiration. And then at least you have like that North Star of like go out there and have those experiences like we talked about, whether it's traveling, whether it's just being very hyper aware of the relationships you're in and like saying, oh, this is a really interesting dynamic. And then you pair it with perhaps a different world or a premise, and that it strikes conflict. And conflict is like what stories are all about, right? Like, how do we resolve the conflict? How does that conflict get bigger, smaller? How does it influence people differently? So have that. Like, you need to have your own egg, but how you nurture it, like, you can water it with stuff. I might be like, my egg or whatever needs different kind of conditions than your egg needs. So, and it's different times in the gestation period of said egg. Like, you're gonna need different kind of feedback and inputs. And at the end of the day, if you're having fun and you're enjoying it, that's really what matters. And for me, I probably feel like too many inputs in my already scrambled brain. You've probably
Yeah.
noticed I talk 2x speed, everything I listen 2x speed. It's something I'm working on, but more inputs is not going to help that, right? Like I need to
Mm-hmm.
consume less and create more, and that's something I'm always telling myself, like less podcasts, less watching YouTube, less, and then you kind of reset yourself, and then you can get that inspiration from the sun on your face, and you're like, oh, this is really interesting, and what would that feel like to a person who's been at the bottom of the ocean? Like, then you can start having those things bubble up to the surface. And so if you're not already engaged in that, you're like, I read a book once in a while, I go for a walk, I'm not like freaking tethered into the internet all the time, then you don't listen to me. Like, so I think it's for people who feel like they have so much going on up here and it's already very dense. They don't have a lot of bandwidth. I just don't know that plugging that in is useful. It's more useful than listening to podcasts and things, depending on what you're doing. Like, I think I could replace a lot of the media consumption I have with books, and I would improve from that. So it's like, but if you're just saying keep your media consumption and add books on top of it, that's where I'm like,
Yeah.
that's probably not going to help, right? So
Yeah.
I've got my own demons to slay here.
Yeah, for sure. You were just talking about conflict and how that builds the story. There's a quote that I remember reading about one day. It goes, conflict is the beginning of consciousness. And the whole point of this quote is this idea that we as people, even though we want to stay away from conflict, it's conflicts that build us into who we eventually are and what we eventually do. And you are a great example of that. You talked about Moscow and how you were seeing pretty bad things over there that help to shape the way that you think. You talk about or you talked about just now how you're dealing with these demons when it comes to dealing with the balance between media and reading books and listening to podcasts and then having that affect your creativity. However, at the same time, we don't want to chase conflict. That's the ironic part. So, from your perspective, based on that quote, then, how would you tell someone to then go and find conflict to be able to then help them boost their own creativity then? Because at the end of the day, conflict is what helps us to evolve.
I think if you reframe it, because conflict, I have no problem with conflict, but some people might bristle at that term, right? Like, oh, I don't want to go find conflict,
Yeah.
especially if they are maybe like an introverted person. Say
Mm-hmm.
like, where do you feel like you stand out? Where does your voice ring out, right? Like, where is it changing with the harmonies? Like, where do
Mm.
you feel like you're adding something new? Because that is conflict. That is like, there's a burr on that blade, and you're trying to rub that out, and that's where the sparks come because like something's standing out. So I'd say like find that and then capitalize on it, right? Like find those. That doesn't mean you're correct in standing out. You might be wrong, but there's probably some story there, and that could be a character who has the same problem you have, where they're standing out and they need to get filed
Mm.
down, and that could be a cool training arc or whatever it could be. So I think that's an area that comes to mind in terms of that. Um,
Mm.
yeah.
Nice. The reframe. I like that. I actually really like that. Especially because now that I think about it, where you can stand out. It's funny how people don't understand what that truly means. I'll give you an example. When I tell you, hey, who stands out on YouTube? Everyone will yell the common names, right? Those Mr. Beasts of the world, the people who have just gone to unbelievable lengths, right? But ironically, standing out doesn't mean, and you what you said was perfect there. Standing out doesn't mean that you need to stand out. And what I mean by that is your example was great. You took two different styles in a book, sci-fi dystopian mixed with the supernatural, and blended it together, and it turned out well for you. So I actually I really appreciate the way you talked about that reframe. I'm going to think a little bit more on that in a little while here. But real quick, what is something about you? Because our message here at Authors by Us is to help people to see you as a human being. And so far, we've done a pretty good job with that. We know about you as a person, that you are someone who is very scatterbrained, but at the same time, you are someone who's had experiences going to college, traveling to different places, and learning all of these different things. And about the fact that you're big into video games and drawing and illustrating and industrial design and just so many different creative avenues. But that's the thing. Unless we were talking on this podcast, no one would know that about you. And in fact, if they picked up your book, chances are they would just open the book, read it, and that's all they would think of you as, is just an author. We don't want that here. We want people to know you as Carson, the guy, right? So, what is something about you that you would love the people to know that they more than likely cannot learn if they just read your book?
I'm just gonna answer this as if they haven't seen my TikTok because I think once you see my TikTok, you're like, oh, this is a person who wrote this story. Um, I would just say like I'm not as dark and serious as my novel. I know I have RBF, but like I'm a goofy dude. Like let's talk. Like I'm eager to help people. Like reframe things. I love doing that. It's what I do in my work. Like you mentioned all these things. You call it scatterbrain. I don't know if you've seen Invincible, but there's like the character Red Rush. He's like a Flash kind of
Mm,
knockoff, right? And it's like his
yeah.
perception of the world. It's like everything is just boring because his perception is so quick that he's
Hmm.
experiencing time like it's slowed down for him, right? I'm not
Yeah.
saying I'm some super genius or whatever, but I
Yeah.
feel like that comes from this scatterbrain. Is like I can follow conversation, I can make a joke, I can jump in here and people are like, oh, you scatterbrain, you ADHD. It's like no, it's just I am perceiving this all, and I'm not getting distracted. Like I'm still on topic, and I have
Mm,
some friends talk about that. To me, like you put down the book, you didn't know me. What do you want to know? It's like I'm a goofball. I'm gonna probably like I quote. I think you should leave more than probably anything else, which is like, oh, do you quote all these books and these authors? No, like I think at the heart, it's like humor is a huge thing for me. It doesn't show up in my books because I don't know that I necessarily communicate it well. I think it's more of an in-person skit-styled humor. Um, but I think that's a dynamic that unless you're seeing my TikToks or you talking with me,
Mm,
you're not going to pick that up. There's a lot of people that
yeah.
even meet me like, oh, this guy kind of seems like, I don't know, like read my book, Strafe. I think people might think I'm like Strafe initially,
Yeah.
but then it's like I'm like the twins, and so I think that's something that's important to know, especially as I've seen people react and they're like, this is like super brutal and dark and like violent and like so. And I'm like, I'm not like that. Like, I think I can write that because I love just turning things on their head and be like, what is the craziest thing? And I think an element of humor is you can tell a joke that you don't believe. I know it's hard in this world. People get offended and they're like, oh, you must really believe that. I like absurd things, and I think that's given me the skill set and like the ability to write really dark stuff. I don't think my book
Mm,
is excessively dark. It's going to depend on
yeah.
the reader, but it
Yeah.
allows me to do that without being infected by it or needing that because I can tell things. And I think all authors are going to have that to a certain degree. Is you can tell a story that you yourself don't necessarily believe, or perspectives of your villains. I don't actually believe that.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the humor really helps in that, and that's something you're probably not going to get too much of after you put down my book. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Speaking of humor, you talked about your goofy humor. Those are things, and you have that perspective of being able to hop in on a conversation and understand how to almost bring life to it. Did, so, with all of that in mind, then, do you find that right now, in this moment, you're satisfied with how your life has gone? And do you have any regrets in general? Or do you find yourself to just be a very happy person at the moment?
This is a topic I talk about occasionally with friends, like regrets. Some people say they don't have regrets. I think
Mm-hmm.
anyone who says that, I don't believe them or they haven't been introspective enough. But like, I don't let
Mm,
a regret consume me or like influence me too much. It's like, and so maybe I'm redefining regret. But it's like, yeah, if I could go back and do things differently in some certain situations, I would. Like, I regret doing it the way I did. But and obviously there's good things that came of it. I learned lessons, but uh, I don't think I'm sad. I think if I went back, I'd be like, hey, like, finish this, do this, like, I would talk about my book differently. I think one element that I would bestow upon younger kids or my children or whatever is like, I've noticed it as I moved from to Michigan and then back from Michigan. There's a lot of things. This is true of any place you live. There's all
mm,
these like sites and awesome places to visit. Michigan, it was pictured rocks. You go up north like 6 or 7 hours, and it's just the coastline and the forest. It's gorgeous. And most people there had never been, right? But here in Utah, I haven't been to Zion's. I hadn't done a lot of things. My family had done stuff. I might have been busy with work or school, and I think I was very much like, oh, I gotta drive 30 minutes an hour, and it's like, do it. And like, so my perspective is if I went back, I would spend more money on like getting those experiences and developing those relationships and worrying less around like, oh, I want to look cool or whatever. But like, that doesn't
mm,
consume my mind. I'm not depressed. I'm not sitting at home like, oh, I wish I had been like more outgoing. Like, yeah, like you can't change the past. So I don't know. You should dwell in it. You should learn from it
mm.
and teach those lessons to people that are in their past in the sense that they're younger. And so you're like, hey, but you have to be ready to like give good explanations, not just brush your teeth because I said so, and then you learn you got cavities, and you're like, this sucks. Had you explained to me why I should have brushed my
Yeah.
teeth instead of just harping on me, perhaps I would have listened. So
By the way, I've been loving your illustrations. You got great vocab when it comes to illustrations. Those have been awesome. But what's the goal then? You finished writing Shadow Spark. You're currently working on your new trilogy. But I noticed for a lot of authors, once they get done with their first book, and they start writing maybe the next book or the next series, and eventually it gets to the point where it almost feels like they're kind of going through the motions almost. And I've unfortunately seen for a couple of authors that were close friends of mine how it just ended their career because they got to the point where there was nothing that was pushing them forward. For Carson, then, as we look at the rest of 2026, then going into 2027, what's the goal for you, whether that be in life or whether that be as an author, that's really keeping you wanting to push for that next thing.
I mean, one of the main morals of my story that I'm not necessarily living out is like family, right? Like it's everything's about family relationships. Anyone who, their deathbed, most people are like, yeah, I didn't wish I had 3 more Rolexes. Like this is stuff most people like intrinsically know, but kind of lie to themselves that like, oh, if I become the CEO, then I will be happy or whatever. For me, I think it is creating that kind of family. So, ladies, if you're watching, but like,
Yeah.
I think it's that. I think that will also help me like be able to add a level of depth both to the love, the loss that I can write in stories. Like it unlocks it. I've heard that from a lot of people. So excited to become a father. I don't anticipate that happening by the end of this year. I really hope not. I would like to get married before that happens. But I think that, and then obviously, like I mentioned, I love doing this. This ain't paying no bills. You hear all that like from I'm sure all your other authors.
Mm-hmm.
Gotta get myself situated in sort of terms of design, but really at the end of the day, whether it's design, it's writing, it's I've got like a cartoon that I've planned that I would love to do. I'm not an animator. Like you got to create teams and build kind of these things. But with the advent of AI, I know it's a scary word. Like maybe there's some way to like to do that with a smaller team and bring that to life in a way that I perhaps couldn't. I think there's a lot of opportunities in the future. So finding a way that I can leverage technology in a way that I can pursue that family and tell the stories I want to tell, whether it's a cartoon, it's the new trilogy, it's a story of a new brand that I come up with my own product design brand. I think there's so many open vistas and open doors that I just want to make sure that I'm unlocking as many as I can. I won't be able to go through all of them, but that's something I'm looking forward to and kind of redefining myself. A nice word, not a word, a phrase I heard from a fellow designer that came and spoke to a group of us back in Michigan. He said, like, if you don't create your own design identity, one will be assigned to you. So I think this applies to me as an author, to me as a designer, obviously a person, but like people are going to come up with who they think you are as a podcaster, who they think I am as an author, and I have control over that. And so I better come up with one and make sure it's clear who my persona is, my identity. It should obviously be authentic. Otherwise, people are going to pick one. Oh, I think this guy's a dark weirdo goofball who XYZ, fill in the blank, right? So I would like to do that for my design career and as an author. And I'm still pretty early in it, right? Like most authors that we read about that are published, they wrote like 5 to 7 books or whatever before they really popped off. And so I'm still in those early phases. And I could be a horror writer. Who knows, right? But I think it's exciting to kind of investigate that and kind of go down a lot of those rabbit holes.
Well, that was fantastic. I want to thank you for coming on, Carson. This was phenomenal. I think the perspectives that you have in terms of creativity is something that should give a lot of people something to think about, because even though your journey, your life has felt like it was a very natural you had a very natural creativity personality. It's it's still really cool to see how you didn't allow that to limit you to just one thing, and you were able to pursue so much. And I think tons of people out there are gonna be able to learn from that. And also your book, by the way, real quick before we end, where can people find you and your book if they want to read it or if they want to check you out?
Yeah, so I'm most active on TikTok. Never thought I'd say that. But everywhere it's Carson Hawkes Books. So all the socials, Carson Hawkes Books. My Hawkes has an E in it. I don't know. I'll hold this up. I don't know if it's going to be flipped. But Carson Hawkes. My book currently is only sold on Amazon. So pop on Amazon.
Okay.
No audiobook yet. If you really want one, hit me up in the DMs. And like if I get enough people, then I can start working on that. But it's like we've talked about, there's a lot of different avenues and things I'm working on. So
Awesome. Well, again, thank you for coming on. And I'm looking forward to seeing, first of all, I'm looking forward to reading your book because you got me quite interested. But I'm also looking forward to seeing how things go for you as you move forward in your career.
Awesome. I appreciate it. This has been awesome. Thanks, Jalen.
Welcome to the Authors by Us closing thoughts section, where I talk to you guys about some of my favorite moments from the episode and what I learned from them. And I ask you guys to do the same thing in the comments section below. Today's episode with Carson was awesome. I loved it. I loved every single minute of it. And I think the reason why I liked it so much was because this is a man who has so much creativity just running through his veins, right? He has so much creativity in him based on everything that he's done, from building video games to building board games to writing a novel to being an illustrator to working in industrial design, problem solving. There's so much that Carson has done that it's crazy. But he, at the same time, what I found really interesting was how he still had to wrangle everything in two separate ways, right? And I think that's the first thing I want to talk about is this idea of how he still had to wrangle in creativity, right? Because we talk about plenty of times how natural creativity and being able to build your own creativity in whatever it is you're doing, whether you're an author, whether you're a painter, dancer, building a business, whatever it is you're doing, right? We talk about all the time how it is possible for you to be able to become a creative person no matter what kind of background you have. That's something that we've made very clear on this podcast. And in fact, I might talk about it a little more today. Who knows? But what I found to be really cool was the fact that when you are creative and when you are pursuing something creative, you still have to be willing to wrangle it in, because otherwise it can go out of control. And we saw that with Carson and how he was talking about how he would always start projects, but he could never finish them. And ironically, it wasn't until he started talking with his dad, and his dad said, yeah, if you don't finish this book by a certain time, you're going to have to pay me $1,000. That's when he finally almost made the commitment to write it. And then even beyond that, the way he talks about how he consumes media, right? How he had to do a lot less of that if he wanted to be creative, because from his point of view, he wants to see creativity from his own eyes, his own light, rather than trying to borrow from everyone else. Because otherwise, from his point of view, it wouldn't be authentic. So overall, I found that to be really, really cool. And I think that it's something that a lot of us need to think about when we're talking about being creative, is even whether you're someone who's a natural born creative or you're someone like myself who has built up their creativity over time, right? It's still something that you have to wrangle in, because otherwise, if you don't, you could get out of control with it. We mentioned that before, but still, really, really cool point that I wanted to briefly bring up. The second thing I want to talk about, though, is the quote that I told Carson and his answer to it, which was, conflict is the road to consciousness. To me, that I recently read about that quote from an article about 2 weeks ago. And ever since then, it's really stuck with me. And I was really excited to bring that up to some of these authors. And it's a question I want to talk about more with more authors in the future, because conflict, unironically, is the best way for us as human beings to evolve. Yet, at the same time, we don't want to pursue it. It's so funny because no one is out here saying that you need to pursue conflict, that you need to hope that conflict comes into your life, because that just sounds insane. You need to be in an asylum if you think that way. But at the same time, it's ironic how when we look at conflict throughout history, it is always followed by something good, whether it's a golden age, whether it's peace, whether it's a surge in the way that society or the way that a country works, whatever it is, right? Anytime there's conflict, it's always followed by positivity. And that is something that we see a lot in the creative space because, for example, if we just look at books, conflict is the reason why books can be so good. It's the reason why you are interested in the latest Marvel movie. It is the reason why you are interested in watching videos on YouTube. It is the reason why literally conflict is everywhere. But it's so important because, for example, could you imagine if you watched, I know, for example, Spider-Man Brand New Day is coming out in July, right? The newest Spider-Man movie. Could you imagine if you got into the movie theater to watch that movie and there was zero conflict the whole movie? It was just whoop-de-doo, happy-go-lucky all the way through the movie. Do you think that you would be wanting to stay in the theater to continue watching it? Probably not. Probably not. And the reason for that is because there's no conflict, there's no tension, there is nothing there that is making you feel emotional, that is hitting you in the feels. There's nothing there that is making you question what's going to happen next. And this happens all the time in books, in media, in society, in history. Conflict is the thing that allows us to evolve and find positivity. Now, again, does that mean that you should pursue it? We already confirmed. You should not be pursuing conflict, but it does mean, from Carson's point of view, the way that he reframed it, it was so cool because he talked about it could be something as simple as you finding a way to stand out. That can be your way of turning conflict and controversy into creativity. And he was a great example of that too, right? How he took a dystopian cyberpunk-y type of style and mixed it with the supernatural, something that on paper should not work. It should not work. But he was able to make it work. And his readers have said specifically that they enjoyed it. So it worked. It was a gamble, but it worked. And so overall, I think this point just goes to show that while you don't want to pursue conflict, you always want to be looking at it from the point of view of, if I'm going through something or if I have a stance on something, can I stand out enough, or can I stand out in a way that makes my point of view valid, that makes me someone worth paying attention to? And that's something that I definitely want to see about talking more. I want to talk more about that when it comes to other authors in the future as well. But the last thing, and I kind of already mentioned it a little bit, is finding your unique blend. How do you do that? Because we talked about it in the pod, and I want to go even deeper on this subject. So let's do that. Because something that a lot of people will do is they simply try to copy paste. They simply try to copy paste. And what I mean by that is they will watch videos on YouTube, they will watch videos on, let's say, TikTok. They'll consume so much that by the time they try to be creative, by the time they try to do something themselves, it almost feels like they can't because they're so invested and they're so engulfed in the media and everything around what they've been watching and what they've been absorbing and consuming, that now their own ideas don't even feel like their own ideas. Now, that's not to your fault. Kind of, because when you think about it, that's just the way that the world is built now. The world is built around you taking what's already working and making something out of it, right? That's literally, why do you think the saying, don't reinvent the wheel, is a thing? The reason why that is a thing is because everyone will tell you, hey, don't try to do your own thing, don't try to stand out, but instead, just take this, apply it to this, and you will get similar results. Whether that happens or not, depends on a variety of other things, but the point is still there. And I think from this conversation with Carson, what I've truly come to understand and what I want to impart to you guys and is this idea that there needs to be a balance. Because yes, it is good to absorb and consume in order to get information, in order to get inspiration. But when you get to the point where you're not adding your own spin, you're not adding your own thoughts, you're not adding your own opinions, that's when it goes too far, because then it really does start to feel like a copy and paste. For example, it's not like I'm the first book style podcast out there. Right? I'm not the first. I'm not even the 100th. I'm probably the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000th book style podcast out there. But what I found in the book podcast style is many podcasts out there are so hyper focused on the book. And I wanted to go beyond that, because I love conversation. I love nitpicking everything in regards to someone's life, as long as they're comfortable, of course. But the point is I love stories. I love experience. I love thoughts. I love opinions. And I want to bring that out in my guests. And so I was able to find a way to build a book style podcast, which technically is the same thing as all these other guys, but be able to add my own spin to it. And we're still improving it. We're still looking to make it even better, right? So what's the point? The point is that you need to find your own unique blend. And the way you do that is under two circumstances. You can do it the Carson way, which is where you basically just go out there and you really think for yourself based on your own experiences, your own stories, and what you currently know, and then applying that in some way, shape, or form to your career, passion, whatever. Or you can still take inspiration from other places. It's not like I'm going to sit here and claim, oh, you absolutely can't take inspiration from other sources, because you can, for sure. The problem, though, is when you don't find the balance, right? When you get to the point where you're just copy and pasting, that's when you start to have a problem. But if you can take inspiration and then add your own spin to it, you will find something fresh. And then once you find something that's initially fresh, you can then implement on it further to make it even better. And then eventually it is your thing. So that to me is just a few of the thoughts that I loved from this episode, and a couple of things that I want to take away with me. Again, let me know what you guys thought of this episode and some of your thoughts about this episode down in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hit the subscribe button if you enjoyed this episode, and I promise you I'm going to continue bringing you guys the best possible conversations that I can each and every week. But with that, hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk with all of you next time.